I'm here today with John West of Direct Lenders, and popular question that comes up: what are closing costs, and who pays for them, and what do I get for it? So, John, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Rhett. Probably the most misunderstood aspect of a real estate transaction are closing costs.
Absolutely.
Particularly the buyer closing costs. Mainly the seller has such a little closing cost. They have the real estate commission. Outside of that, nothing else. The buyer has to get the loan. They have to have the house appraised. They have to have credit reports, flood permits. They have to have an attorney close it. They have to have title insurance. They have to pay for the insurance premium. They have prepaid interest. They have to pay for several months worth of taxes for an escrow account.
Sure.
By the time you total all that up, it usually is somewhere around 4%.
Of the amount borrowed, correct?
It could be, yes. Now, the higher the purchase price, probably the lower the percent, and the lower the purchase price, probably the higher the percent, because certain of those costs are fixed. Like a real estate attorney's closing fee is the same on a $500,000 house as a $50,000 house.
Sure. So if someone's buying a house, below $100,000, the percentage is going to be higher than if someone was buying a $300,000 house, because of
Yes.
the ratio of the fixed costs that go along with it.
That's
Appraisals
exactly
are
right.
the exact same cost for both and all. Makes a lot of sense. What are the maximum percentages for different types of loans that closing costs, if they were negotiated by their agent, to be paid for by the seller? How does that work?
Well, one thing we do is every pre-approval letter we provide, we always put the estimated closing costs in the letter so that the realtor will know in advance what a loan that size, what they're going to be. But one of the best techniques to getting the closing cost handled is to have the seller, see if you can't negotiate for the seller to pay some of the buyer's closing costs. Another technique might be to, oftentimes they'll ask the lender if they could contribute a little bit to the closing costs.
Sure.
Now, the lender has got to make a profit, so how are they going to do that? Well, in exchange for a slightly higher interest rate, we might be able to pay some of those closing costs, knowing that over the time, we'll get a little higher interest rate that'll reimburse us for sharing those costs.
Absolutely, and kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. I know that there's some, let's just say FHA, for instance, and let's just say the seller is in agreement to paying the closing cost that was negotiated, but there are limitations on how much the seller can pay. What are those percentages?
Okay, so on an FHA loan, they can pay up to 6% of the purchase price towards closing costs.
Exactly.
And it would be really rare that closing costs are going to be that high.
Sure.
Conventional, if you're putting a minimum down, like 5% down, they can only pay 3% closing costs. But if they put more down, then they can pay a higher percentage of the loan and closing costs. VA is 4% of the closing costs.
Gotcha. So if the closing costs happen to be a little bit more with a conventional scenario, there may be a little bit higher money that the actual borrower brings to the table to cover all the fees.
Yeah.
So it's why it's important to have a good realtor, to have a good partner and a loan officer who's dealing with it, to know what these costs are, to make sure that you estimate them properly. Oftentimes I've seen that closing costs were negotiated for, maybe represent the seller, and they were negotiated for much higher than what the closing costs actually were. And a lot of times that borrower or buyer doesn't get the benefit of that. The seller didn't have the fee to pay. They could have possibly gotten a slightly lower price on the house. So one of the things, it's always good to know about what your closing costs are going into the transaction.
That's exactly right. Know it in advance.
Absolutely. It's the tip of the day.